Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We just had a very quick break from a Series 13 match, but now Angelo and I will be bringing you guys a really exciting Spike Myth match for the first Spike Myth match of the day.
Yeah, really excited to get some Spike Myth action in for the day. We've got a couple exciting teams here and a couple really good players, so definitely looking forward to this match.
Yeah, and I think, this is probably the first match with a name that is a little bit more well known to the American side of the field. Nick Borghi, Rayko, as he was known, I think, a few years ago, versus Rayko, who's a really popular player as well, I believe, from the Spanish region. One of those players, I think, that also has done a couple of other draft leagues as well. Currently, though, it is 3-2 for the Sunsteel Strikers over the Celtics of Torkel. The Sunsteel Strikers, though, are one of those 4 teams with 3 wins, whereas the Celtics of Torkel currently have 0 wins, so they're definitely looking to get on the board.
Yeah, Sunsteel Strikers is actually the team I'm on, so we're looking to secure our 4th win, and then the Celtics of Torkel are looking to get on the win side of things.
Yeah, and currently the Celtics of Torkel have those 2 ties, right? And so the fact that they don't have any wins on the board, ties are great, but without any wins to back them up and increase your points, it does put you in a really tough position moving forward, especially when you're trying to not be in those bottom 2 teams. There are other teams now that currently have 3 losses, but some of those 3 loss teams also have 1 win. And by having a win, you're getting more points than you are in a tie. So it's a bit of balancing out and seeing how in the next few weeks these players are going to be kind of taking as much as they can out of these wins and try and boost their teams up for the final few weeks of that. But speaking of players, if we want to take a look over at our players as well for this match, like we said, it is Borghi and Rayko. And if you want to give us a little bit of a lead-in on your teammate Nick, give us a shot for it.
Yeah, so Borghi is a well-accomplished player. He's currently 3-0 in this league, and he's used a very popular Kuma OT in the past 2 weeks, but he's decided to switch it up here. He's also got an NPA 11 top 4 with the Samurais. He was a Rose Shower champion, playoff top 8, and then he is a 5-time regional top cup player. So very accomplished both in online and in person.
Yeah, one of those players as well. I believe now plays in Ohio, was part of, I believe it was like the New York tri-state area. I could be incorrect there. However, Rayko, his opponent, VR World Cup Open top 32 in Series 12, Granada Gaming top 8 in Series 12, 2-time top 16 in Victory Road Tours. So very common, a very popular player in those Victory Road Tours, which are of course also based out of Spain as well. So I'm sure there's a little bit of that camaraderie there as well. Borghi, though, is going to be running Tapu, Lele, Drifloon, Nidoqueen, Heatran, Urshifu, and Rillaboom, whereas Rayko is running Rillaboom, Urshifu, Incineroar, Nidoqueen, Moltres Galar, and that Alolan Ninetales. So it's interesting to see the Firewater Grass Core be so standard on Rayko's team, but instead for Nick bringing that Heatran in instead.
Yeah, Lele Blim is something that we've seen early on in this metagame for sure, and as I mentioned earlier, he's gone away from the Kama'o that he's been comfortable with in this league, so it'll be interesting to see how he adapts to this more hyper offense team with some interesting picks like the Nidoqueen.
Yeah, and I think Nidoqueen is a Pokemon, right? We saw Nidoking a little bit last week. I did not get to commentate on the Nidoqueen game. I'm not sure if it didn't come to the game or if it was one game after me. Things do change, but it does have that sheer force ability. It is one of those Pokemon that almost operates in a way that was kind of similar to a Landorus when it was in that incarnate form, using both the sheer force, having Sludge Bomb and Earth Power, and getting those extra boosts to that attack for both of those teams. However, I think for Borghi, right, he's going to have to maybe try and balance out dealing with those strong Pokemon on the opposite side of the field. That Alolan Ninetales, the fact that it can set up that Aurora Veil and just kind of act like you have those 2 screens, I think is something that is probably a little bit tougher to deal with unless you've got a Brick Break hidden somewhere on your team, which isn't exactly very common, but I think at that point too, having the Tailwind opportunity in a Pokemon like Drifblim, Tailwind and Strength Sap are both really interesting moves to have and can definitely be helpful against something like that Rillaboom on the opposite side. So depending what these players end up leading, I think is going to be pretty indicative of how the game is going to start, especially if you're trying to start with something fast to kind of keep up with those Pokemon like the Rillaboom and the Urshifu that have that great priority. But Ninetales and Incineroar are the lead for Rayko on his side of the field, and then for Borghi, he is going to be bringing out the Rillaboom and Urshifu.
Yeah, so a pretty standard lead here from both sides. You have fake out pressure coming out from both sides. The Rillaboom's going to be able to exhibit the faster fake out pressure, but Rayko has an opportunity to go for something like a Aurora Veil or maybe a Moonblast into the Urshifu. So Borghi's going to have to decide here whether he's going to go offensive and try and target down that Incineroar or Ninetales with something like a Surging Strikes, or if he's going to want to pivot out into something more defensive like the Heatran in the back, which is fairly good into both of these.
Yeah, and I think at that point too, right, you have this great opportunity to go for something like a Surging Strikes into the Incineroar, and it feels so tempting. But you have this Pokemon on the opposite side of the field that can do so much damage, really, to either Pokemon. You have the opportunity for Blizzard, you have the opportunity, like you said, Aurora Veil, or even a Moonblast as well. So both of the Pokemon on Nick's side are probably not feeling terribly comfortable right now, but they need to get that damage off early into this Ninetales before it can become a bit of a problem. And that's why Ninetales is such a fun Pokemon that we got to see a lot more in non-Dynamax formats, because Lapras kind of took over and had that similar opportunity. But Rillaboom is the faster Fake Out user, will connect onto that Incineroar first thing this turn, who went for its own Fake Out. Ninetales goes for a Moonblast this turn into that Urshifu, and that does a ton of damage, does not bring it down to a possible Focus Sash, so we're still unsure of the item. It does get a special attack drop, not too important here. Urshifu's Surging Strikes, though, will go off this turn thanks to not getting faked out. Does go into the Ninetales, though, and that should be a pretty easy knockout here, as it's doing almost 50% with each attack.
Yeah, an important reveal there for Borghi not deciding to run Choice Scarf Urshifu this week, as the Ninetales went first. But the Urshifu was able to live the Moonblast, so showing that it has some bulk invested into it. And on the opposite side, the Ninetales not having a ton of bulk in it, going down to a Surging Strikes, which I believe it's capable of living, depending on the Urshifu spread. But yeah, interesting turn there. It's a bit of a trade. We're trading the Ninetales for the Urshifu, and we're left with Rillaboom and Incineroar.
Yeah, I think if you're Borghi, you're not too upset about that, though, right? Because getting rid of the Ninetales before it sets up its Aurora Veil is a better trade-off, I think, than losing your Urshifu, because at that point you may still have the opportunity to try and get some big damage. You're not dealing with the threat of a really bulky team, and then Borghi gets to bring in his Nidoqueen at this point as well.
Yeah, it's a bit of a threatening position for that Nidoqueen, though, because the Rillaboom is still intimidated from that turn 0, so something like a Grassy Glide into the Urshifu won't be enough to take it out, and the Nidoqueen or the Tapu Lele, which we are seeing Borghi debating whether to switch in or not here, is in threat of a Surging Strike, so it's going to be interesting to see if Borghi decides to play this defensively to save the Nidoqueen, or just let it go down to something like a Surging Strikes. But we do see them decide to lock in the Woodhammer, or at least debate it, so that might be able to pick up the KO even with the Intimidate, but it's going to be interesting to see here.
Yeah, but the Woodhammer's an interesting call, right? Because if you bring in your Tapu Lele and you get up that Psychic Terrain, you are locking yourself out from using Grassy Glide really to any powerful effect, right? You're not going to get the priority of it because the terrain has changed. Tapu Lele can then kind of go for some strong Psychic type attacks into the Urshifu on the opposite side, but it can't really hit that Incineroar for a ton of damage. Urshifu, though, goes for a U-turn this turn, does get that super effective damage onto the Rillaboom, does a ton of damage thanks to that critical hit. I was going to say usually that's a 50% amount of move. However, Urshifu going to switch out here for Rayko and going to bring in something that can probably take a Woodhammer a lot better.
Yeah, really good play there, and we do see the Rillaboom come in here. So the terrain is actually reset for Borghi's Rillaboom. Going to get that grassy terrain, but not sure how much longer it's going to stick around, and it is still intimidated. So very interesting play here.
Yeah, Rillaboom's Woodhammer does connect onto the Rillaboom on Rayko's side, and what a great switch in, right? Does very little damage. You're taking your own recoil to pretty much the same effect, and Flare Blitz as well should be plenty enough to finish off this Rillaboom on the other side of the field, and I think that puts Rayko in a great position. His Urshifu now feels much, much safer in the face of having to switch in at any point. You've got the opportunity now to go for something like a Parting Shot or even a U-turn with your own Incineroar and allow your Urshifu to come back onto the field, and then you have a really good Surging Strikes target.
Yeah, it's interesting. You were saying that it looks bad for the Rillaboom to not have grassy terrain, but it's actually the roles have flipped. The Tapu Lele is now sitting in grassy terrain and wishes it had its own psychic terrain. So a bit interesting turn of events here. Yeah, like you said, Rayko's in a pretty good position. He has Fake Out pressure with Rillaboom and can just Parting Shot out. But yeah, if this Urshifu on Rayko's side is Scarf, which is usually the case with something like a U-turn, it should be able to just come in and clean up this game, especially alongside the Grassy Glide with Rillaboom.
Yeah, and it's going to probably be a Fake Out here first off. Thanks to that Fake Out pressure from the Rillaboom into that Nidoqueen does a nice chunk of damage for a Fake Out. Moonblast from the Tapu Lele into this Incineroar does a ton of damage, honestly, and it also gets a special attack drop on another physical attacker. But the Parting Shot from the Incineroar into the Tapu Lele will lower the special attack on the opposite side of the field and will allow for Rayko to switch out here. You now have the opportunity as well to maybe go for something like a Aqua Jet as well, maybe try and pick up some quick KOs if need be. But instead, I think Urshifu is in a good position to go for some Surging Strikes.
Yeah, definitely. I think asserting strikes into the Nidoqueen should be able to take it out, and then something like a Grassy Glide into the Tapu Lele, followed up with asserting strikes the next turn, or just another Grassy Glide should be able to clean it up. Really, really well played here by Rayko. They decided to go for that defensive U-turn into the Rillaboom, kind of just going for the safe play, not trying to make any big reads, and it really paid off. They got their critical hit, which did a ton of damage to the Rillaboom, and allowed the Incineroar to sort of finish it off in that last turns there. And yeah, now they're just in a really good position with what I'm still assuming to be a Scarf Urshifu and a Rillaboom in grassy terrain against these two offensive threats in Nidoqueen and Tapu Lele.
Yeah, and I think at this point, right, Rayko did a really good job of what, like you said, he did a very good job of controlling that terrain. And by keeping the
Hmm.
terrain in a position that was good for him, I think it is really helpful. Getting your Rillaboom on the opposite side of the field, that's something that you don't always think about when you have, I think weather sometimes feels more visible when you're trying to gain that control. But instead, by keeping that terrain control, especially in this format, and allowing your Rillaboom to sit far more comfortably, you have the opportunity to still go for those priority moves instead, even with Tapu Lele on the field. And that grassy glide threat can still be really threatening, even though you've got the opportunity to maybe go for other moves. I think a Moonblast from Tapu Lele would be enough to probably get a knockout here if it needs to. But Nidoqueen going to go for the Protect this turn just to try and stay safe for a little bit, maybe try and stall out some of this terrain. Surging Strikes their targets into that Tapu Lele. Actually, no, sorry, I keep forgetting that Urshifu has a very fun special ability that you don't want to protect in front of. So it's going to target into that Nidoqueen is enough to get a knockout really quickly there, thanks to that Unseen Fist ability.
Yeah, and based on what I saw on that turn on Borghi's side, it looked like they were just sort of game planning for game two. They ran the clock down to a timeout, and they were sort of they sort of had the teams up on their screen. So maybe game planning a bit, trying to figure out what to do in game two to sort of bounce back.
Yeah, you turn into the Tapu Lele. It doesn't do a whole lot of damage there. It will allow you to reposition, but it does do some nice chip just in turn of whatever it needs to kind of get damaged next. Especially, you're bringing the Incineroar back in, kind of just switching this Firewater Grass core around as well.
Yep, resetting the fake out. Gonna go ahead and throw a fake out into the Tapu Lele and finish it off with surging strikes. You still have the Rillaboom in the back for a grassy glide. Yeah, this game is pretty much over. Be interesting to see how Borghi adapts in game two. Maybe you go for something like the Lele plus the Drifloon and just get your Tailwind up and try and do as much as damage early on, and then clean up with something in the back. But yeah, it was didn't feel super like it didn't feel unwinnable for Borghi. It just felt like Rayko had a couple key positions where they made the correct play and put themselves in a better position.
Yeah, and I think it wasn't even really so read based as well, but I think it definitely was kind of
Hmm.
a thinking 3 or 4 turns down the line kind of thing where you know kind of what your game plan is, what board state you need to thrive by the end game. I think it's interesting as well that the two Pokemon that didn't come were the Nidoqueen and the Galarian Moltres. You kind of stuck to a very standard core for the 4 Pokemon that you picked, so I almost wonder if the Nidoqueen and Galarian Moltres are more of a tech pick, something that you bring for maybe a little bit of a different team, especially if you were predicting on playing something like that Komodo this week, especially just based on, if Nick is running that standard team for a couple of weeks, you definitely probably counter team to build against it.
Yeah, definitely. And we did see the power of the Firewater Grass Core as usual. You do not need too much extra flair around it. Just going with the Urshifu, Incineroar, and Rillaboom, and the Ninetales didn't really do too much this game. It did take out the Urshifu early on, but yeah, the Firewater Grass Core really putting in the work here.
Yeah, I almost feel like the Ninetales was more of a critical hit leaves out with 1 HP, and the last Surging Strikes will finish that off, and we'll take this game for Rayko. But I think the Ninetales was interesting in the lead because it took so much attention away from its partner, and I think at that point you have to respect the Ninetales and the threat that it brings, especially if you don't want to deal with something like an Aurora Veil or even a Blizzard, especially with your own Rillaboom on the opposite side of the field. So I almost feel like diverting the attention in Game 1, Turn 1 by putting your Ninetales out on the field and allowing your partner Pokemon to maybe get some big damage off, especially with something like a U-turn, I think is really nice to have. And it does kind of show that those 3 Pokemon are so strong and so good together because they all have opportunities to pivot and just kind of switch around and just be super annoying with a bunch of fake out pressure. So it's interesting to see what that Ninetales' real true purpose was there, and I think that was to keep its partner Pokemon safe without having to go for something like a Follow Me.
Yeah, and you definitely see that Borghi respected it. He targeted down turn one, tried to get rid of it. It did put a lot of pressure on 3 of the mons he brought, so definitely makes sense on his end to go ahead and get rid of it early on. But yeah, proving that the Firewater Grass Core was able to clean it up even without that major threat on his side. So we'll definitely have to see how he adjusts in game two.
Yeah, I almost wonder now too if you assume that Borghi maybe tries to target into the slot that isn't that Alolan Ninetales. It's a really comfortable pick into Nick's team because, like you said, it does handle so many of his Pokemon so well. And if you do get an Aurora Veil up, it can be something that can just make the rest of the game slow down so much more in your favor because then you're forcing the opponent to maybe hit a couple of times. It doesn't matter too much with an Urshifu, right? Because those critical hits don't really matter. But if you have a Pokemon on the opposite side of the field like that Tapu Lele who's stuck in that end game, then you're maybe in a better position, right? If you allow for this Alolan Ninetales to get the Aurora Veil up and then take care of the Urshifu on the opposite side of the field, then maybe you slow the game down enough to continue kind of taking those knockouts pretty much turn by turn. And I think that's kind of the board state that maybe you want to go for, but it depends on the leads that you see here. And it's going to be Ninetales Rillaboom once again from Rayko.
Yeah, we're going to see the Drifloon and Urshifu here on Borghi's side. So a bit interesting. Usually you see the Drifloon paired with the Tapu Lele on lead, but sort of maybe respecting the Rillaboom lead and going to go ahead and preserve the terrain for later on.
Yeah, and I think at that point too, right, you at least give yourself the opportunity to go for something like a Tailwind or a Strength Sap, but you're against this Ninetales who can do so much damage to you. At least you can't get faked out this turn thanks to that Ghost typing, so you have that opportunity. But I think at that point, if you're taking that time to go for something like a Tailwind, you're not doing the damage onto the Ninetales that you need to do. I think, Urshifu's Surging Strikes, though, was a pretty comfortable knockout at that point as well. So then you're leaving this Rillaboom to maybe go for something free like a Grassy Glide.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Like the Urshifu is sort of threatened by something like a Grassy Glide or even a Fake Out plus Moonblast. I don't believe the Ninetales will be slower than the Drifloon without the Unburden activated. So, something like a Fake Out plus Blizzard is also very possible here from Rayko's side. So we'll have to see if Borghi predicts that and goes into the Tapu Lele.
Yeah, Drifloon switches out here, though. Tapu Lele switches in. So, you have the Tapu Lele with the Drifloon, but it is, currently they are spending time on the field at separate times, almost playing phone tag together. But this Psychic Surge is going to be great to help with this Rillaboom on the opposite side of the field before it can get some big damage off. Ninetales goes for a Moonblast this turn, consistently getting that offensive pressure. Does a ton of damage, is enough for a knockout there, so that must have just been a really funky roll that Urshifu had in game one where it survived on just 12 HP. Rillaboom's U-turn this turn into that Tapu Lele does a pretty good chunk of damage as well. So interestingly, that Ninetales probably always gets that knockout, but it just depends on if the Blizzard is up, the hill is up.
Yeah, definitely. A very unfortunate turn there for Borghi. I definitely understand his play, leaving the Urshifu in and probably targeting down that Ninetales to go ahead and get the KO. Based on last game, which the Urshifu was able to survive the Moonblast, but like you said, a bit of a funky damage roll there. Gonna go ahead and lose the Urshifu early on, which is huge for this game. And the Rillaboom on Rayko's side actually goes for a U-turn, which is a great play because now you have the terrain control in the back if you want it. And the Incineroar coming in here is not too threatened by this Tapu Lele, so we'll have to see how Borghi adjusts here. You could go for something like bring in Drifloon and go for a Tailwind, but at this point you're not too worried about speed control. You just need to put out as much damage as possible. So I don't know if a Specs Lele is able to one-shot a Ninetales like this, but yeah, that was definitely a big setback there, losing your Urshifu turn one.
Yeah, that Unburden does go off thanks to that Psychic Seed. But now this is the time, right, where Alolan Ninetales could set up that Aurora Veil if it wants to, because now you're not dealing with the threat of critical hits on the opposite side of the field from the Urshifu that you were able to knock out. Ninetales also sitting here completely unharmed, right? It hasn't taken any damage, whereas Borghi's already down one Pokemon and his Tapu Lele has taken probably closer to 35-40% of damage at this point. Incineroar, though, going to switch out here. Can't go for something like a Fake Out thanks to their terrain, but Rillaboom can come in and change that up really quickly, and it's gonna allow maybe for this Tapu Lele psychic type moves to be a little bit less powerful. Messes with instead also that messes with the priority opportunity Shadow Ball into the Rillaboom from this Drifblim. No Tailwind this turn, no Strength Sap or anything like that, but Ninetales is able to get that Aurora Veil up, getting the power of the Light Screen and the Reflect kind of all in one here, and help to boost up against this Tapu Lele's Moonblast, who is also targeting down into the Rillaboom, so a double target there, and Rillaboom is super comfortable right now.
Yeah, we see how little that Rillaboom takes behind the Aurora Veil there. I can only assume that it's Assault Vest to take that little from Specs Moonblast from Tapu Lele. So definitely a good play there from Rayko. When we see Borghi decide not to go for something like an Icy Wind or a Tailwind, and that allows the Ninetales to get up the Aurora Veil and mitigate the damage from Tapu Lele. And looks like Borghi is considering forfeiting this game this early, and I guess I don't blame him given how on the back foot he is. So we're going to see a very quickly wrapped up game two there, and it's going to be a 2-0 win to Rayko.
Yeah, that is a pretty quick game, right, between both of those. So really, congratulations to Rayko for winning that over Nick. I think that's a little bit tougher for you though, Angelo. Now, as that means that you guys are currently tied 3-3 between the Sunsteel Strikers and the Celtics of Torkoal. So you guys know you probably have two more games that you really want to win to keep the Celtics of Torkoal down at the bottom of the 8 teams currently.
Yeah, we got two strong players left to go, so we have all the confidence in the world in them. So hopefully they'll get the win for us.
Yeah, and at this point, right, too, you've got Duck Pond, who's one of those players as well, I believe. Duck Pond's Italian, if I'm not mistaken. He's incredibly talented,
Yep.
kind of a long time player. Definitely somebody whose name that I know, and I know I've been able to see quite a few of their games. So that's someone who I'm sure you're happy to have as an anchor in the back. It's kind of in a way like tug of war, right? When you're fighting these close games, you want to have those strong players kind of anchoring you in the back. The ones that don't let that pressure get to them, especially. But I think it really does kind of show a testament as well to Reiko's team. Even though it looked like maybe he did some counter teaming for something like that Komodo, it was still a versatile enough team that it was able to handle something completely different.
Yeah, definitely. That Ninetales definitely put in the work game two. It didn't do too much game one, but it sort of single-handedly dismantled Borghi's team in game two there. So an interesting. We'll have to see if Borghi decides to go back to Komodo week 4 or week whatever next week is. But yeah, definitely, it was definitely well played on Reiko's end. It just it's a good matchup for him, and yeah, well played.
All right, guys, we will be taking another quick break, but we still have more matches for you, so do not go anywhere for the Sootopolis City League. We will be right back.